A major unspoken driver of League's popularity is its ability to accommodate and meet the needs of the way you love and tend to think. Although this is something that's not commonly spoken about, it is my personal belief that this ability of League to validate your thinking style is what makes it so unique and makes it stand the test of time. No matter the champion, role, or play style you like to emphasize on, League does an excellent job of giving you the appropriate reward to your unique strength. And it is the point of this video to use this to tap into how your mind works, how to make it work better in League, and actually using this knowledge and being cognizant of it ourselves in order to help in context outside of the game. This could be used in situations where you're understanding maybe how you study, maybe how you thrive in a working environment, how you thrive with other people. You know, these are things that you can utilize and understand and hone in order to not only round yourself out better, but also lean into your strengths. In addition, the best esports and the best moments in esports history thrive off of unique implementations of creativity and these thinking styles. Some of my favorite moments include things like Season 6's Miss Fortune support tech into Zyra support and the unique deployment of Heimerdinger support or the double AD carry meta. Or think of things like the unique playstyles of players like the Baus, deploying mastery and understanding over wave management and what is truly prioritized from a top lane perspective. These feats of creativity, when displayed at the highest level, can be truly incredible, and I believe these are some of the most beautiful moments in the games that we should also be trying to implement and really leaning into our understanding when we're playing as well. We can start off with basic and more obvious components of the game that can basically allow you to lean into styles that tailor to what you like and how you think. And I want to prod you a little bit as to maybe certain selections and certain things you're good at within the game can indicate your thinking style. I wanted to start with something as basic as your role. For every single component that I'm going to talk about, there's obviously going to be nuance to this because there's going to be exceptions to the rule. Maybe your perception of a certain factor of the game is going to be different from another player's, but by far and large, there's going to be some commonalities based on what you like, right? So for example, with your role overall impacts the lens in which you view League as a game, and therefore is a reflection of what you like to think about in the game. This can also be a reflection of how you think within real life scenarios and what you like to prioritize in real life problems and your overall problem solving styles. So for example, one of my closest buddies is a top laner and he views the game on a very micro level. He loves micro interactions between champions, thinking about matchups, very typical top lane stuff, loving the nuance of how matchups can play out on a per trade, per stage, and even per minion basis. This is why you see matchup spreadsheets the most often with top laners, because this is something the role values very often, and the success of top laners often rides on this ability to navigate different matchups, because there's not going to be much involvement, at least in the beginning of the game for sure, for them to really get involved. So they have to rely on this and on themselves and their own agency to navigate these situations and these matchups because it affects their game the most. Players that tend to have this acute attention to detail and focus on technical ability can lean into roles within their work that rely on this technical knowledge. So this could be being like an engineer or an analyst or something that relies on manipulating information and relying on it in a similar manner, right? In my eyes, you're essentially a specialist. You're relying on your technical knowledge and you're thriving upon that in order to really demonstrate success. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Some players, and when they're thinking outside of the game, they could think a little bit differently. Maybe they just do it because they like that about League in particular, but overall they probably think a little bit differently. This is something that's also possible, but we're not going to fully this is basically just to prod your mind in order to give examples, right? So I wanted to compare it to jungle, which is basically the opposite mindset, right? So although jungle can also have micro, of course, in the form of, specific pathing, pulling camps, a lot of different intricacies about that. We've seen those silly Guinness World Record, like speedrun sort of insane optimal clears, which are really cool, right? But overall, I would say jungle as a role prioritizes the game from more of a macro lens, right? I would call it more like you're the leader of a chess match. You're super often a playmaker, a dictator of what should happen in the game, and the entire flow of the game kind of rests in your hands, right? You are that X factor. You're that moving piece that can dictate what plays are possible and what plays are not. However, this does not necessarily mean that you cannot view the game from the other lens. I would actually say it's probably extremely important, and this is probably also reflective of how you should probably think in your real life, right? So when we talk about League as an example, you, for for example, as a laner, should know what your junglers need depending on the jungle matchup, and also identify what your team needs to win. And as a jungler, you should know what your laners need. Maybe not to an insane extent, but just enough so that you can function in your role and do your job as best as possible. Think of it similarly to like a project manager, which is my actual job, by the way. We get lingo thrown around all the time. You should be able to work in cross-functional teams, understand projects at a high level, be able to work with vendors, right? That's the same thing. You gotta work with your different teams and understand what they need and their specific needs, right? It's the same thing. If you know a certain matchup bottom lane is contingent on whoever gets pushed level 1, then you might have to play your pathing differently, right? This is also affected by the champion you choose to play or bring to that game in order to address the unique issues of that game. Just like how you need to understand the unique situations of every laner and what unique problems every game presents, in your work, there's going to be very unique problems and very unique people that you're going to work with, and it's your job to kind of understand that. So you can see some of the similarities here, and this is why some of your thinking styles can lean towards some of these jobs. I noticed I tended to think this way, and I'm a bit of a yapper, so it ended up working out. Of course, there's going to be some variance to this, but I could argue that the average jungler is probably a strong communicator and has a good overall sense of the big picture decisions in everything that they do, whether that's League of Legends or making major financial decisions for billion-dollar organizations. Because of this, I could recommend junglers to take on leadership positions or communicative positions in their professional environments or maybe their educational environments so that they can lean into this strength, identify what needs to be done, and communicate that with the people around them that they work with. Another component of the game that's going to majorly affect your thinking style or is going to be an expression of this unique thinking style is, of course, the champions you play. And I think this is one of the biggest sources of validation for why a lot of people can feel like their unique style is validated in League compared to other games. So, for example, in a game like Valorant, there's going to be some level of agent variance that affects certain classes of agents that you play and how they function, but fundamentally, the core gameplay around every single agent in Valorant does revolve around the gunplay, right? That is just how it is, and that's totally fair. A lot of other popular games are going to be like that. It's not like you can choose your role in soccer and you can, you can lean into that. That's something that's unique about esports titles and specifically League of Legends in general, right? If you like to think about the game in a different way, League does a very good job of having champions that accommodate for that style and completely changes your lens of the game to the point where there's genuinely, objectively more than one way to approach the game that can be correct depending on the champion you play and the situation that you are in. You know what certain champs like and what they're looking for, and you have a specific champion that can have different tools that allows you to express that in a way and take advantage of that thinking style. And you can use this knowledge to understand exactly why you potentially excel at certain champions and why not at others. And that's totally okay if you're okay with having that sort of lens of the game and you like that style, or this is an opportunity to see and potentially grow in the other styles that you are not so fared in, right? This goes a little bit two ways. An example of this is right now, I've been playing a ton of AD carry because I've been finding the role more satisfying in terms of just its micros. I like going pew pew and all that kind of thing, right? And I noticed myself that I struggle much more with champions that don't have innate mobility tools. This means that in my specific case and my knowledge and current lens of the game in this current time with these champions, and it's not going to be as strong with champions with mobility. And I visibly noticed that I cannot think about the game on a macro level as fast when I am playing champions in this lens, which is completely natural, right? More of my brain processing power is being burned on calibrating to how these champions work and how they function in the same scenarios that what I would be able to be completely comfortable with a high mobility based champion. That is just the name of the game a lot of the time. And there's going to be a lot of that happening when you play a game like League because there's so many distinct different styles you can play, which is both a blessing and a curse. There's other examples of this in other roles, right? We have the classic support that can only play Enchanter style, or one that can only play Engage style, which is fair because I think these are very two different distinct styles and different lenses of the game. They are honestly looking for very different things when they play the game. Or mid laners that can only play mages because assassins or battle mages or even other champions that could potentially go mid lane require a different understanding of potentially the same matchups and how you play the same scenarios around different objectives, right? Some things that are allowed on certain champions are not allowed on others. And we can lean into this if we want to unlock our highest understanding of the game. The deeper you understand one style, that allows you to understand the game at a deeper level. And the more you can understand a breadth of styles, it can also give you a different way of understanding and being a higher level of the game. right? These are different ways to understand how that kind of works. Another one is micro versus macro decisions, right? So there's going to be two elements to that, right? You can make decisions and come to the same conclusion as someone else, whether you focus on certain mechanical aspects of the game or very detailed aspects of the game, or you're a very big theory person, right? And you can think about big picture and understand like, well, in concept, these champions work in this way, or the game is supposed to work in this way because of this theory, right? And it can come from champion natures, champion identities, how certain components of the game, high level, affect how the game works. And what do you think about when you load into each game, right? Do you start a team fight because you notice that your team has hit your stride, or do you notice specific cooldowns being down, or you notice that the positioning, the micro positioning of one champion in particular gives you the indicator to go, right? Both are pretty important. And I think there's a lot of, for the average player, there's going to be a lot of cases where you can make the same decision for either aspect. I think you could put eventually at the very, very highest levels of the game, there's going to be more emphasis on the little minute details, of course, because there's not going to be much left in order to optimize. But I'm talking about overall for most players, right? What do you think about when you load into each game? You understand what comes out. When you think about it, it can also help you subsequently lean into those strengths in other contexts, right? So maybe you don't pay enough attention to detail in school because you notice you're more of a macro player in League, and it goes the same way. It's like, what's the point of focusing on the details, the crazy minutia, when you don't understand a theory at the highest level, right? When in a theory completely in concept, why go into very specific examples and argue over nuance when the nuance is not even relevant? It totally makes sense. Or maybe you don't get the point of certain high-level concepts like history because it's more memory-based and not based on logic, and you can't calculate things, and you don't like the lack of detail that you can pay attention to, right? It's just a little bit cringe, and that could also be another way of looking at that, right? The same thing in a job. And you can also make decisions based on these understandings. And I want to reemphasize that different players can hit the exact same rank and the exact same skill level with completely different backgrounds and lenses of the game. And that has to be something that you must accept in this game, no matter what you think, and or if you think a certain way is objectively more honorable, it's a certain way of thinking to hit a certain rank is easier or harder. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, you're just playing the same game, and they go through the same system in order to hit the rank that they have, right? And why does it even matter? Like, why do you care? Right? Realistically, if you like to think about the game in a certain way, that's already enough. Like, why do you give a fuck? It's really not big, right? So let's say, for example, two players at the same rank, they're gonna go decide to base at a certain time, or go for a trade at a certain time, or they're a jungler, they don't even have to think about trades, right? They could be thinking about those trades from a jungle lens, right? They know the matchup as well, right? Maybe the players like you or me could think about a few varying different factors based on our background, and my conditions are really good on this base. I'll have first recall for dragon. I might have to skip a camp in order to be there because my understanding of this matchup requires that, I should pay more attention to the matchup in certain waves, right? There could be some things like that. But let's say a professional player, we have to allow people coming to the same conclusion, or people maybe even having different and perfectly okay takes on this but coming from a different background, right? The only exception, again, is maybe a professional player that could come to the same conclusion, but the amount of factors that they are processing is completely different, right? So let's say we're thinking about 2 or 3 factors in any given decision. Maybe someone like a professional player is thinking about anywhere between 10 and 20. Right? It's totally possible, and they can also be utilizing concepts from their lens and understanding of the game from a very unique professional-based background that we might not even be able to process, right? You don't know what you don't know. Another in-depth example of this is One Tricks, which probably have the most skewed but detailed lens of the game in existence, right? So as a minor example, I used to one trick Kha'Zix back in the day, but this champion built really bad habits, in my opinion, from a fundamentals perspective, because what he looks for and his version of the ideal game in certain scenarios is generally considered illegal for a lot of different champions, right? Because he's a very immobile assassin. He's a very high damage, like no CC assassin compared to the average jungler, which is a facilitator. And his team fighting is a little bit rough, but because of that, you can cause a lot of chaos in the game, and you thrive off that chaos. And that's why he's really good for environments like solo queue, because you can get a lot of agency and opportunity for different mix-ups. And plus, with straight damage, like you can find a lot of ways to just get creative and take the game into your own hands, which is why I really liked him. Another example is singed players, right? There's a statistic that's actually really strong that the better that the player is at singed in particular, the worse that player is at League in general, because the skill set required to be a good singed player is so completely backwards, right? However, their lens is so specialized, so they could probably see things and understand things at a certain level that we do not, right? This is fundamentally the same style that the Baus uses, right? He understood Sion and the needs of top lane from his unique perspective, and he utilizes that to do things that almost no other top laner does, right? Because he doesn't decide based on what the population does, he decides based on what his understanding of top lane is with respect to Sion in particular, and he gets extremely creative with that. Of course, it's a very unique style and can be manipulated if teams know how to go around it. But this does mean that you have to objectively acknowledge this style is existing and is something that can be successful based on the amount of success that he's been able to actually do with it, right? Even another one is communication styles, which is going to be classic, right? The role we play affecting how we communicate, how we use this information to help better ourselves in other contexts outside of the game. Like, for example, it's not going to be that common where, certain roles like AD carry are going to communicate a ton. It just doesn't make that much sense in my opinion. Although, unless that person who's playing AD carry is also a very loud and communicative person, then it makes sense. Or if you're just a very quiet person, and how does this impact you in your actual day-to-day life, right? And some roles you can argue require more communication and some roles require less. And how does that affect the same thing when you're in work or school or whatever you need to communicate to, right? I would say roles like mid, jungle, or support are very important for communication, right? And let's say you're also in a role in real life that requires a good level of communication, but you're a quiet person and you notice that in League. I think quiet mid laners actually, it can be successful, and a lot of players are like that, right? Because they're so used to it and they're focused on their own game, right? But mid lane is a role that impacts a lot of people's games as well. Maybe you're in a role or you interact with a lot of people where you impact those people too. And as much as you want to just keep to yourself, is this something for consideration? Is this something that you should potentially reflect on in order to understand, like, maybe I should look to communicate more? Or maybe I'm a turbo yapper. I should communicate less. I should let other people speak, right? I'm a jungler. The buck ends with me. This is my game to lose, right? Or you're just a group member on your project and you're just talking way too much, right? Like you're talking over your teacher, or you're talking over your advisor or something like that, and it's completely unnecessary. Or the different things that you talk about, or what you're looking for. Do you prioritize other people's opinions, right? Or do you understand where they're coming from specifically, right? It's just like League, where you understand the laner's needs. What do you understand your team members' needs? How do you use that information? How can you communicate and affect and choose the way you communicate in order to not only raise, let's say, morale around the people around you, build the vibes, build rapport, or you can navigate that in such a way that you can, set a certain mood. You can almost extract information from them, right? I think this is a very important skill that's probably completely overlooked in a game like League because no one really cares about this. There's other minor concepts that I could probably consider, like you can build an understanding of the rules so that you can break them, and that's like learning how to learn, right? Let's say you can't win an objective on one side of the map, so you overload on the other side. That's only something that you would really pick up with enough reps that, like, you're saying, like, oh, normally people are just going to fight around whatever objective's happening, whether or not their conditions are good or not, right? And they just try to figure it out. But sometimes teams, they take advantage of that and they understand, like, this is unplayable. I've been here before. I know this one, and then they decide to actually just double down on the other side of the map and try to take something on that side instead, right? Dragon's unplayable. Let's overload top. Let's try to get something on top and save our tempo for the next objective top side and see if that even makes sense towards what our team wants to do. And then you can reflect on that afterwards, right? And that's something that, like, players like you and I could use, but maybe there's a lot more nuance when we think even higher level with people like in the highest level of play and like in the professional play, right? And I think this is another example where even I can't really give you the best example because I'm not a professional player, right? But I'm okay at the game, but, like, I'm not professional. And that's something where I identify for myself, where, this is also, potentially a limit of my thinking style and how I could potentially improve it, right? Learning how to learn, it's like an infinite sort of skill, because when you set yourself up for that, you can basically get yourself out of any sort of rut experientially or when you're learning or anything like that, right? So these are lots of examples of my thoughts around, like, how League can kind of reveal how you like to think, how you respond to failure even, in different components of the game, and like how that really, and how you can use this information in order to really understand your identity as a brain, almost like, how you take this information, how you process information, how you can take advantage of that in order to really put yourself and set yourself up for success. And I that's basically the takeaway from here. And this is an exploratory piece for everybody to understand, like, hey, why do I think this way? Or why do I like playing like this in League? Does this mean like I could think like this and use this to, tailor to my strengths in other areas of my life? Could this even potentially make me better at League? This is essentially the mindset that I want you guys to basically pick up, the level of curiosity. And I think that's part of the beauty of a game like League, right? Where it just reveals so much about yourself if you wanted to. And that was the goal of today's video. And I really hope that you got a little bit of that from this, because I think there's not many areas in my life where I could be like, wow, honestly, because like I learned this in League and spent so many times and so many years and hours like getting pelted and like learning lessons like this from League, it actually honestly contributes to a lot of my success in terms of the way I think now. And I think it's so like crazy because it just sounds like pure degeneracy. But then when I look at other people that I interact with in my life, and I'm like, this guy has not gone through 20,000 hours of solo queue. I can tell you haven't had the maturity. You don't like your engineer. You think your team is gapped? I don't think this guy has 20,000 hours of League under his belt. He hasn't. Yeah, this guy doesn't know what an O10 bot lane is like. That's interesting, right? These are the thoughts that I want to bring up. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. And hopefully I piqued your curiosity and inspired you to reflect a little bit about your own thinking style in League and how to refine it and how to really build that relationship with that and apply it to everywhere else. Hope you guys had a good one. Catch you in the next one. And yeah, hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Hope you enjoyed.